This BizNews production is brought to you by Brenthurst Wealth. Building wealth and protecting legacy since 2004. Invest better with Brenthurst.
Wow, from Foottech ANC to Save ANC. Well, you get all all sides of the spectrum here. I'm going to go back to Davos now in January, and something that was not reported here in South Africa, and I want to get to your gradually suddenly issue and what that might mean for us. Mohammed Yunus, who is the guy who started Grameen Bank, who would be well known amongst the business community, he won the Nobel Peace Prize. That was interesting. And he was happily at a conference in France, in Paris, when the young people in Bangladesh wanted to get rid of a similar government to the one in Nepal, and I think not dissimilar to South Africa's. And what happened, he explained this. Now, Mohammed Yunus is not an alarmist. He said that every morning the children would say goodbye to their parents, goodbye to their friends, and because they didn't know if they were coming home that evening. They'd go out and protest against the government. The government shot hundreds of them, and where they fell, they made a pact that as they died, someone else would take their place. Extraordinary. We didn't know about what happened in Bangladesh here in South Africa. He said after the third day of this, the parents joined the children and the Bangladeshi government fell and they ran away. And so Mohammed Yunus, who was minding his own business in Paris at a conference, was called back to help them rewrite the constitution. Gradually, then suddenly. We've seen what's happened in Nepal, as you explained there. What are the chances of that occurring in South Africa?
So I think this is not going to play out the same way as Nepal in South Africa. And the reason is because we've got functioning democratic mechanisms. This is the safety valve for unhappiness and frustration to express itself. In Nepal, for example, what triggered the protests was the ban of social media. So I don't know if any of you have ever tried cutting off the Wi-Fi for your children. You face a potential revolution. In South Africa, we're not doing that, right? We're keeping our Wi-Fi active. We're keeping our social media going. We've got freedom of expression. We're able to exercise our choice through our vote. All of this is working, and the safety valve is very important for that reason. And so when I said that the ANC might face potentially a similar scenario to the Nepalese government, the condition or the proviso was that is only if that safety valve gets closed off. And that is a small but distinct possibility, right? So imagine an ANC, EFF, MK coalition where they get together and say, okay, enough of this democratic nonsense. If we keep submitting to the will of the voters, we're going to find ourselves out on the street. We better stop doing that. But if you do that, if you close the safety valve, then I think the risk of violence becomes far greater. And then the Ceausescu outcome or the Nepalese outcome becomes possible.
I'm going to have a quick poll here. How many of you in the audience think that General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi is a good man? Hands up. Okay, interesting. Probably at least half. Do you agree?
I'm skeptical. So I think the media has described the situation as being one of good cop versus bad cop. And that's, I think, the kind of simplistic narrative that it's easy to buy into. It's probably not quite true. So he may be a person of integrity, but I think he's also an actor in a political environment. And I think that his actions have political repercussions and maybe even political designs behind them. So if you look at Senzo Mchunu, he was a very prominent KZN politician. And I think somebody that Cyril Ramaphosa relied on to help him, gain strength in KwaZulu-Natal for the ANC. And I suspect that this shot that was targeting Mchunu was actually aimed at Cyril Ramaphosa. So you try to take out one of his allies to weaken him in the province of KwaZulu-Natal. It's hard to tease these things apart, right? Because none of us is going to be surprised if these allegations of corruption in top echelons of the police and interference in investigations are true. I think we're all expecting that to be true. But the motivation might not have been purely altruistic and for good purposes to make those statements.
Paul O'Sullivan says he's a crook. Paul O'Sullivan says the Commissioner of Police is a crook, and he uses examples, and Paul O'Sullivan is usually right. He might be wrong in this case, but he's usually right. But what he then also said in that conversation that we had was, be careful what you wish for. And that was also brought up in this conference as well. Be careful what you wish for. When I think Davy Root was saying, when the military establishment or the security establishment starts saying, well, these politicians are all corrupt, we need to take over, we need to rescue the country, the consequence of that for democracy can be dire. What is your reading of that situation and the possibility, the percentage chance, the risk of it happening?
I think relatively low. And I think one of the many assets that South Africa has as a kind of protective factor is its multiple centers of power. We've got quite a diversified industrial sector. We've got diverse regions in South Africa, diverse political interests. And I think we've got various forces as well that do not take well to being dictated to. So I think asserting and imposing military authority on South Africa or police authority on South Africa is not going to be easy. It might not even be possible. Some years ago, Bill Johnson, R.W. Johnson, delivered the Hernley Lecture, which is an IRR lecture in a very proud tradition, about the history of liberalism in South Africa. And I thought one of the really good points he made was that South Africans, having been deprived of their liberty in the run-up to 1990, 1994 and the transition, realized the value of their liberty and won't easily let it be taken away from them. And so my hope is that if the government or the security forces get any funny ideas about oppression, suppression, restriction of freedom of speech, South Africans, having liberated themselves from the Nats that many years ago, will say, well, that's not really what we fought for. Like, we want our freedom. And I think that there's a slightly rebellious streak that runs through South Africans, and that's actually quite a good thing. When you read Deneys Reits's book, Commando, about the way the Boers organized to fight the British, it was very, very difficult because they wouldn't want to do the things that they were ordered to do. You'd put somebody in a certain unit, and then that person would remember that their brother was in a different unit. They would just run off. So imposing discipline was really hard. And it's not just the Boers. When you look at the National Dialogue opening convention, the president, was exhorting the people to unity, but that's not what he got. He got heckled, people criticizing him, and that's actually great. You actually do want a society where there's robust discussion and people are debating and trying, arguing about the way forward. That's actually a good thing. I think unity is very much overrated in that sense. You actually want this process of conflict to be the mechanism by which a country moves forward, by fits and starts.
When we look at the world, and I think that Prince made the point that authoritarian regimes are becoming more in fashion. In fact, there are many people who surprise me that they think Putin's a good guy. They, hey, hang on, don't you read history? They think President Key's a good guy, president for life, both of those, by the way. I heard today somebody was saying, oh, Rwanda, Rwanda works. Huh? Again, if you only drink the Kool-Aid. With South Africa, with the attempt that there was at insurrection, if you want to put it that way, in July 2021 in KZN, what did we learn, or what did maybe those who wanted to organize and control things, what did they learn from what happened over those, or the way that society reacted at that time?
So I think you actually asked me two questions, so let me answer both of them.
Well, the authoritarians must have thought, okay, we can take over the country, kind of thing. So
Okay.
if it's in fashion, let's do it.
Yes.
But maybe they learned something there. That was really my point.
Good. That's a good point. So I think that I don't share the enthusiasm for benevolent dictators. I think it's much the case as it is maybe with Bitcoin, where you hear the stories of the people who became fabulously wealthy. You never hear the stories of the people who lost vast amounts of money by investing in Bitcoin or other asset classes. I'm not singling out Bitcoin here. You only hear about the successes. And I think dictators are like that. So there's a couple that sort of worked out quite well and developed their nations, but the vast majority did not. Mostly what you get when you get a dictator is an evil dictator. You very rarely get a benevolent dictator. And even when you get a benevolent one, in many cases, that person will turn malevolent over time. Because how can you stay in power? You're going to make mistakes, you're going to make people unhappy, and you're going to start torturing, disappearing, locking up, murdering people. So benevolent dictators, I'm not a big fan of. I would also like to use the example of Leon Schreiber in the Department of Home Affairs. You might have said, look, a DA minister coming into an ANC administration is going to battle. And that person needs to be a benevolent dictator, like has to call the shots, like has to fire people, has to impose discipline, be ruthless. That's not what he did. Right? He's been successful in that department, but his mechanism for being successful has been by showing leadership. And now we come back to Prince Marcella's point again. What is leadership and how do you get it and what does it look like? Leon Schreiber is demonstrating it. And what he's doing, what leadership is being able to tell a compelling narrative about why people are doing what they are doing, that people can buy into and follow. And what Leon Schreiber is doing is that he's saying to Home Affairs staff, he comes into office and he knows he's the outsider, he knows he's the DA guy, it's going to be tough. And he says, okay, you're my senior leadership team. You, every single one of you and everybody that works in this department, you are the most important people in this country. Because when a South African is born, the Department of Home Affairs is there to issue a birth certificate. And when any South African leaves this world, dies, the Department of Home Affairs is there to issue the death certificate. You are crucial. You are important. Your work is essential. So he's leading from the front. He's giving meaning to the work. And that is how you lead a nation. And I think that's also how it's eventually going to work for South Africa. The benevolent dictator is not going to work for the reasons that I mentioned, plus also the reason that you mentioned. South Africans are going to fight back. They like their independence and freedom too much to be willing to submit, I think, to one person calling the shots.
But what about, just go back to KZN, July 2021. That was a defining moment, perhaps, in some ways?
Yes. And I think it probably demonstrated resilience more than it demonstrated vulnerability, in the sense that it was a big thing. There was proper violence, proper looting, proper arson. People really died, and it could have become far worse. But yet it was contained, and I think it was contained even in the absence of state power. The ability of the state to impose and assert its monopoly on violence, that was not done. For 10 days, 11 days, the state was almost absent. And it was individuals and communities that stood together and organized themselves and stood up to hold this back.
Okay, so it's been very well documented and articulated over the last day and a half that the ANC is in crisis. You kind of put the seal on it. What is being done internally, or do you agree with the thesis that the structure of the ANC makes it impossible to restructure, i.e. the antibodies are just too powerful and they will kick back at any attempt to take this 1920s organization into the 2020s?
That is certainly true at the moment. But I do think that the fear of death concentrates the mind. And I think as the ANC is increasingly confronted with its own demise, it may reach the point where it is open to persuasion that there is a way to save itself. And that is kind of the message that we're trying to communicate. Either you bend or you break. And ultimately, that's not up to us. It's the ANC that has to make that choice. You can choose to go to your death, go to your doom. That's fine. We're not emotionally invested in that. But you can choose to survive. But then you must make that choice, and you've got to do something about this. And you, as the ANC, have to figure this out. Sure, you've got structural problems. You've got the NEC, which is complicated, and you haven't got the right leader. But that's actually your job to figure that out. It's your organization. If you want to save it, you've got to figure it out.
But aren't you assuming that these are rational people? What Prince was explaining to us, and R.W. Johnson's been saying, is the ANC elective conference is an auction. He who has the money makes the purchases of the people who are represented there. And Prince said, it's much worse than that. It goes all the way down to branch level. So if you've got people who are hired guns, How could they make that kind of a rational decision?
I th-
Or were these guys exaggerating?
No, I think they're right, and I think it's a strong argument against the ability of the ANC to make the bending decision. It may not be possible for them, but ultimately, I think we don't have to be emotionally invested in that. Right? We can say the ANC is an organization and it's run by people, and those people must decide how they want to live their lives, how they want their organization to be run and to flourish or go under. That is really the mandate and the responsibility of the people inside that organization. And we can just point out to them, if you desire to make a different choice, that choice is available to be made. It's not hard to get the economy growing, as it has been pointed out. I agree with that. I think this is an economy with a huge potential. It just takes taking the brakes off the economy, getting a few things right, a few basics, and I think it can fly.
But you've also said we've got a national democratic revolution. So let's just kind of just stay with me on this one. We've got hired guns who are running the country. They know that the end is nigh because they ain't going to be changing. Their only plan, their only blueprint is a national democratic revolution. So what they have to do now, if the end is nigh, is what any person in power will do when the end is nigh, and that is grab what they can. So is there not a danger that we're going to go, that what the Guptas and their lot with their industrial scale pillaging is going to look like child's play when we finally get the bill for what's going on right now? Or again, is this just exaggeration?
No, I think this is true. I think that's basically the process that's underway at the moment. And thinking of a way to avoid that is not that easy, for the structural reasons that you describe. But there's a kind of obvious market opportunity for a political entrepreneur inside the ANC to say, like, this thing is hollowed out, it's weak, it's lacking leadership, it's lacking vision. Let me be that person. Let me describe what we can do, and let me bring the troops to fall in behind me. We are marching in that direction. And very clearly, I think President Ramaphosa, for all his virtues, is not that person. He's not going to do that. He doesn't have the vision, he doesn't have the will, he doesn't have the desire, I think, to exercise leadership at that level.
Right, questions, lots of them. From Stuart Wilmington. If the ANC is under collapse, what do you predict will happen to the pragmatic leaders in the ANC? Would they sink with the ship, create a new party, or jump ship to others?
Currently looks to me like they're going to sink with the ship out of those three options. If they form a new party, they've got a financial problem, which is, how do you sort of earn your own salary? Where do you get money from for the new party? So that's quite hard. I think the two groups that have successfully jumped ship so far are the EFF with Julius Malema and MK with Jacob Zuma, who, based on force of personality and business connections, were able to make it work. They were able to find the finance to set up a new party. I'm not sure that a moderate ANC splinter would be able to do the same. I think it would be quickly subsumed into other parties. It would be maybe desirable for a further radical splinter to be hived off and maybe join the EFF or MK, and leave a rational core inside the ANC. But I think that is not a very likely outcome.
Graham from Mark asks, where does the MK party vote go in 2029 if Zuma is no longer available to front it?
Yeah, I think it fragments and splinters. So this is the weird situation we face at the moment, is that the ANC is weakening at the same time as the EFF is weakening, and MK is still holding up. But I think once Zuma goes, then MK also weakens. Where do all those voters go? And that's going to be a key question that we're going to be asking ourselves, in the run up to 2029. Where do those voters go? And I think quite a few of them will go to the DA. So I'm slightly more bullish on the DA's prospects than Prince Mashele was, because I think that Asher Sarapin was right, that the DA has managed to detoxify its brand by being in the GNU and through association with the ANC. And so it may well be that 25% is not a barrier for the DA anymore, and it has the potential to go even further than that and attract many of those disgruntled ANC voters. Who knows? MK voters might go to IFP in KwaZulu-Natal. Maybe even some of them will go to the DA.
Andre Kravachen's question is, do you have a breakup of the unemployment figures according to age group in South Africa, if more young people are unemployed, as say those above 50, is this not a time bomb ticking?
Yes, it absolutely is. So I don't have all the statistics off the top of my head, but certainly youth unemployment rates are higher than overall unemployment rates. One statistic that's also worth knowing is that about 3/4 of all unemployed people in South Africa are long-term unemployed. They've been without a job for longer than a year. And of course, the longer you've been out of the job market, the harder it is to get back into the job market. So it's a huge ticking time bomb, a huge problem, and there's no way to solve this except through fast economic growth. So the answers keep coming back to that. It's the debt, the deficit, the unemployment, anything that you think about. Economic growth is the only way to fix it.
And you have a tax on capital and a tax on meritocracy. So the way we're going about it at the moment, not too clever. Talal's question says the ANC bending is clearly not a possibility because of their hard line policies, but the breaking of the ANC is perhaps the most likely outcome. Do you think then that the only solution for the DA would be to join secession parties and make the Western Cape a New Haven independent country?
No, I do not agree with that. I think the best solution for South Africa is actually to have the ANC not collapse, but continue to decline into 2029, while the DA continues to grow, and for those parties to form a coalition government. I think that would be the most stable solution for South Africa, and also the one with the greatest prospects of success for the country. The secession idea, I think I understand the appeal, because you want to sort of have your life raft and cast off into the sunset, away from the rest of South Africa. But I don't think that works. I think that the Western Cape would not be able to insulate itself from the collapse of the rest of South Africa if that were to happen. And it's, I think, easier to fix the whole country than to split off the Western Cape.
So the scenario that you're painting is a little bit like the National Party. They got smaller and smaller and then disappeared. What do you think of Corné Mulder's suggestion last night that Kortbroek is going to become the ambassador to the United States? That's Martinus van Schalkwyk, who was the last leader of the National Party.
I think it's not a solution, right? So, I'm not sure what the thinking is there. It may be that certain people think that a white ambassador would be better received than a black ambassador. I don't think that works.
I did ask Corné, and he said, well, he is a member of the ANC. That's like his greatest qualification. Okay, Jacques Bobois wants to know which faction of the ANC is likely to come out on top at their 2027 elective conference. The one with the most money.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I think so. We're still a long way out, 2 years out. It currently looks like Paul Mashatile and Fikile Mbalula are trying to position themselves as potential candidates. We've heard the name of Patrice Motsepe floated as well. And one thing that I could imagine is that Patrice Motsepe associates with one of those two candidates and provides the moolah to make sure that faction wins. But I think currently it's too early to tell. And it may also be that if the ANC weakens sufficiently rapidly, it doesn't actually matter that much. They'll be so small and so weak and so ineffective that who leads them doesn't really matter.
Well, we know Patrice has got a sizable ego, but we also know that he's not doof. So if he can see the ANC going down, why would he throw money at it?
Yeah, that's a fair point, and I'd like to use that point to link to the idea of the ANC plus EFF plus MK link up. So imagine that the EFF and MK are two pirate boats, and they want to capture a big, rich boat, a treasure galleon, which is the ANC. But the galleon is taking on water. It's already listing to starboard. Is that the kind of ship you want to board and take over? That doesn't really make sense. And both pirate boats are also taking on water. So it's not a great scenario for the pirate fleet.
And the guy that they want to actually pay for bailing out the big ship is a bit too smart, perhaps. Well, who knows? Maybe not so smart. I doubt it, though. Hans Matter is asking, should the DA try to do a better deal and save the ANC from total collapse?
Yes, I think it should. I think, and this is where I make myself unpopular with this audience, I think. But yeah, I think that's kind of what would be best. If you think about gliders, they fly through the air and they haven't got an engine. So if they want to land, they have to plan it quite carefully. And you sort of want a point landing, a nice glide path with the A and C and DA, sort of coming into land in 2029 with a nice smooth landing that's not too bumpy. Yeah, and that probably is that landing.
I mean, how hard is it to put your phone on silent? Seriously, guys. As business owners and investors, please elaborate on your comments regarding protest. How do we raise our protest and yet build unity among race relations within South Africa? This is from Stuart Wilmington.
Okay, I'll start answering that from the back. How do we build unity among and improve race relations in South Africa? So race relations in South Africa are a lot better than most people think. So we do annual polling and we ask people, have you experienced racism? What do you think of people of other races? Do you think we all need each other to make the country work, etc., etc.? And 60, 70, 80% of people, depending on the question, are absolutely fine with people of other races. That's not an issue. It's mostly at the political level and the academic level that those divisions are promoted and created. It's not between ordinary South African people. The corollary to that is that, once again, the answer to the question is economic growth. So if you want South Africa to stick together as a unitary country and you want race relations to be okay, the way to do that is with economic growth, because you want people to understand that by trading and dealing with their fellow South African of whatever color they might be, whatever race, whatever region, that's how you manage to increase your own prosperity while also increasing the prosperity of your fellow South African. So that's what you've got to do. What can you do as an investor, a business person? I want to very strongly encourage you to support organizations that fight this fight. So the IRR, obviously, I'm going to mention. I'd also like to mention organizations like Sakelicha, for example, the Free Market Foundation, NEASA. All of these organizations are in the fight for the right reasons, and they're going to give you a very big return on your investment if you support them.
We're very lucky that we've got these NGOs. If you think about the darkest days of the Zupta takeover of South Africa, there were not many people fighting the fight. Until Gupta leaks came out, I know from the media side, we felt very alone. And we weren't alone because there were NGOs who were doing even more than we could attempt to do. Where does it all come from? Is it part of this pioneering spirit, this gatvolheid of South Africans, this reluctance or refusal to be told what to do?
I think it's partly, and I think that much as the notion of South African exceptionalism has gained a bad reputation, I think there's some truth to it. And I do think that South Africa is an exceptional country with an exceptional history. It's very unusual in the world. One of my colleagues once asked me what the difference was between Russia and South Africa. And I said, well, I can think of quite a few. But he said the main difference is the Institute of Race Relations. Because this thing has been around for 100 years, and it's been protecting the same values for 100 years. It's about freedom, about non-racialism, about prosperity through economic growth. It's like all the basic things that have never changed since 1929. And that is what we want to continue doing long into the future, because we think that we tend to think in 3-year cycle, 5 years ahead, but these threats will still be around 50 years from now, 100 years from now. And you need organizations like this to be around as a bedrock. Political parties come and go, and political leaders come and go, and political fashions come and go. But you want organizations like this to be there, anchored in society, fact-based, reason-based, advocating for these values that allow societies to prosper and flourish.
Do you think there's a chance that we may, like at the time of Mandela in 94, we may become a beacon for the world again? Just a lot of what you're saying now, when I look around the world, France going to go to for a bailout at the IMF. They seem to not know where to work and move next. The UK is in pretty dire straits as well. The United States, well, we've heard enough about that. But is there maybe an underlying possibility that the people of South Africa will win this and shine a light for others to follow?
Yes, I think that is absolutely true. I think that Europe, for example, is in far greater trouble than it realizes. Um, it's over-regulated to a ridiculous extent. It has aging populations with a median age is around 45 to 48, depending on the country. And these people do not want to be exposed to risk or their assets to be exposed to risk. So they're very fearful. They embrace expensive energy, which is making their industries uncompetitive. So the prospects for Europe, in my view, are not good in the medium to long term. And South Africa is not as over-regulated. It's got the young population. It is willing to experiment. It is willing to innovate. It's got these pockets of excellence throughout the country. It's got the experimentation bubbling away like in a cauldron. I also think that we've been through our DEI phase in the form of BEE already. Right? So we've done the diversity, equity, inclusion, race-based preferencing, favoritism. We've discovered that it hasn't worked. And I think we've got a chance of turning away from that and saying, okay, like we need sort of to get back to solid values like merit, accountability, taking responsibility for the things that you do, and that we can build a successful society on that basis. It doesn't take much. It's kind of hard to see at the moment, but you're right. I think that possibility exists.
The wholesomeness. I keep reminding people who are praising President Xi and President Putin. First of all, he's from the KGB, which should kind of ding dong, but I keep reminding them, well, if that's the kind of future you want, there's certainly no IRR, and there definitely is no biz news. There's no biz news in China. There's no biz news in Russia. In fact, if biz news was in China, and we had Jackie Cameron went there with Adrian Hadland, her then husband, who was a professor, and she was going to work for us, but she couldn't get a permit from the Chinese government to write for us, let alone us establishing there where we would have needed a censor from the government to sit in our offices. That's the reality of the information that you get when you're in China. It might have a lot of good things, but as South Africans, this is terribly difficult for us to swallow. Keith Wetmore, if the need for a UBI, got it? Oh, okay. Becomes inevitable, what chances of, say, a compulsory land service being established to get some value for tax money spent?
Yeah. So not a big fan of compulsory services or of government make work schemes, because I think it's ultimately a form of value destruction, and you can sort of dress it up in different ways and make it look appealing. But what you really want is for people to be appropriately rewarded for productive work. Darby Root was talking about the free lunch. I very much subscribe to his theory. There's only one free lunch that exists in the world, and that is the value that is created in the free transaction between two people, where both the seller and the buyer each are better off than they were before. And that's not what you're getting from a compulsory work scheme, labor scheme, or from a make work scheme. You're destroying value by doing that. So rather focus on how to get people into work, because companies are drawing them in and want them. They need their labor, they need their skills, they need their ability to be productive. That's the right way to create jobs.
John, it's really been a fantastic debut, and thank you for the contribution you've made to what's been quite an exceptional conference. Thank you.
This BizNews production is brought to you by Brenthurst Wealth, South Africa's leading boutique wealth manager. Trusted to guide families for over 20 years. Invest better with Brenthurst.